explained. Up in arms against Janta, the unquiet border states of Myanmar. On Tuesday, the Myanmar military bombed villages on its border with Thailand in retaliation for the loss of one of its outposts in the southeastern Karen state that the Karen National Union has seized earlier in the day. Protests against the military coup in Myanmar have assumed new dimensions, with some ethnic armed organizations mounting their own resistance against the junta and the generals hitting back with airstrikes, a sign that they are ready to use the most brutal weapons to crush opposition. Tensions in several states. On Tuesday, the Myanmar military bombed villages on its border with Thailand in retaliation for the loss of one of its outposts in the southeastern Karen state that the Karen National Union had seized earlier in the day. The airstrikes sent hundreds of Karen, one of Myanmar's many ethnic minority groups, scattering across the border. According to reports in the online Irrawaddy news portal, early on Tuesday, KNU soldiers attacked and razed the military outpost near the Salween River, which runs along the country's border with Thailand. The airstrikes came hours later. Some 24,000 Karen people have been displaced in fighting since last month. In the north in Kachin state bordering China, the former tri-junction with India, aerial bombardment has been going on for days since the Kachin Independence Army attacked two police outposts and a military base at the Tarpen Bridge on April 11. There have been airstrikes there since April 15. Some 5,000 people are displaced. In Myanmar's western Chin state, which borders Mizoram, 15 soldiers were killed on Monday in two separate incidents claimed by new ethnic armed militia called Chin Land Defense Force. 10 soldiers were killed after a convoy of trucks was attacked while it was on its way to reinforce the local base in view of increasing protests against the military. Another 5 soldiers were killed in a protest at another place in Chin state. Federation dream unfilled. The resistance by the EOS seems to have taken the Myanmar's army by surprise. In all, 21 EOS and several more militias are active in the border state of Myanmar. Many of them have been waging armed resistance against the state for decades now. One of Aung San Suu Kyi's priority when her party was governing Myanmar from 2015 to 2020 was to take forward the efforts of her father, Jen Aung San, who led the government for independence from the British to build a federal Myanmar of the Bamar majority and ethnic minorities who form one-third of the country's 54 million population. But after a ceasefire agreement with 12 EOS in 2015, the NLD government has unable to make much further progress. At least 4 more meetings held bringing the other groups on board were not successful. By the end of her first term, Suu Kyi was convinced that unless the army could be tamed through reforms to the country's constitution, Myanmar had never become the federation that her father had envisioned. Bamars and the unrest. The army draws its power from the divisions between the majority Bamar and the minority ethnic groups and the hostilities between the ethnic groups and themselves. However, since the February 1 coup, some EOS, including some that had signed the ceasefire agreement, have expressed solidarity with the pro-democracy protesters. The military had offered a ceasefire to all groups, that this was rejected by many of the influential groups including the KIA and KNU. If more EOS were to rise up against the army, joining hands or even fighting separate battles, Myanmar's armed forces may find themselves engaged in multiple mini-wars in the border regions at a time when it would like to focus on entrenching itself in the same way as it had done in the 1990s. According to a report in Nikkei Asia, the combined strength of the EOS and other militias is about 1 lakh, while the Myanmar army is 350,000 strong. The use of air power by the military, according to the report, could be a warning to the EOS. The protesters have dismissed the plan since it does not include the release of Suu Kyi and others arrested by the junta. The new generation of protesters have also demanded that the 2008 constitution drafted and voted in by the military should be scrapped. Thank you.